Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining today's session. Your sales and marketing efforts are unintentionally collapsing your margins. I'm Ariana Garcia, your moderator, and I am thrilled to introduce our speakers, Kristen Westberg, a leading expert in GTM and B2B sales, and our special guest, Steve Armenti, whose deep experience in B2B marketing brings a wealth of practical insights to today's discussion. We're here to explore some of the biggest challenges sales and marketing teams face today: oversaturation, rising competition, and the struggle to connect with increasingly skeptical prospects. So let's dive in. So, Kristen, tell us about what's happening in B2B sales and marketing channels these days.
Yeah, great question, Ari. The biggest challenge we're seeing right now across all of our B2B channels is just an increased level of volume going out in our messaging and communication, and a true lack of differentiation in what we're saying. So we're just kind of shouting a bunch of noise into the void. What we're really seeing is that, while volumes have amplified, our engagement and our conversion, even just our open rates, are starting to go the wrong way, mostly because of that oversaturation, and our buyers are just confused and pretty frustrated. So what we see right now is that in email, especially, the average open rate for B2B email marketing is approximately 21.8%, and click-through rates really hover around 2.78%.
And that's
And
still optimistic.
well, I was gonna say that's not even addressing conversion. I did note that a lot of the data sources we were referencing were leaving out conversion. And what we're seeing, and a lot of commentary from leading marketers in B2B, is that conversion has fallen off a cliff. And, it's so not only are all of these, these channels underperforming. When I was referencing an article that spoke about how to optimize your email marketing campaigns, which we all know so well, I mean, the laundry list of what we need to do now to stand out includes, having a super targeted audience, and ideally having as much first party data as we can collect, making sure our audiences are segmented so we can personalize content at scale, getting our subject lines nailed, because most people, almost 50% of people, open an email based on its subject line. We are producing high quality content, webinars, case studies, white papers that take a lot of time to develop. We're using a lot of technology to do customization and automation. We're doing A/B testing so we can try to extract some data to tell us what's going on. We're hitting up our clients for social proof, for testimonials, for their data so we can produce those case studies, get their reviews, and then, I mean, if we actually do produce a lead, we're having to nurture and follow up and build a relationship. We've all been beating up our domains to death, and now we're trying to create healthier domains by setting up multiple domains and being more cautious about how many emails we're sending, but yet we have all these fake domains that are out there so that we can still hit those high volume metrics that are essential to try to drive any conversion or any sales whatsoever. I mean, and don't even get me started on LinkedIn. Like, I remember when LinkedIn was actually like a sacred channel, and now, I mean, there's too many AI tools out there. We're all getting these garbage LinkedIn messages that show they don't know who we are, they don't know what our business is, and it's just message fatigue and frustration. And so when I talk about like the totality of what it even takes to try to cut through the noise, all I think about is the resources we're spending here, like how much that is costing us in people and tech, and I mean all the things. And it's like to just send out millions of emails into the void. So it's not working anymore.
It's not working anymore, and we're seeing diminished returns over and over again on these, this what we're spending on these resources.
Yeah.
So Um, great. So that a lot of insight there, I know, and we're all feeling that same pain. Since we're here though to talk about collapsing margins, tell us about how all of this oversaturation in our sales and marketing channels is causing these collapsing margins.
Yeah, I just to echo what Kristen said, the question is why? Why is marketing and sales jumping on this hamster wheel and just running faster and faster and faster to do more and more? And there's a stat that stuck out to me, which is from GTM Partners winter report that said 56% of the respondents failed to hit their revenue targets. So you think about that, these teams are missing their revenue targets and they are scrambling to try to make that up. But in the process, they're spending more and more and more to try to catch up to that target. But with everything you just said, Kristen, it's getting harder and harder and harder to create that pipeline coverage. And so you almost have, both sides of the equation working against you. And I think practically speaking, also the hyper segmentation of marketing and sales today is it's a blessing and a curse. Like we can now fine tune exactly who we want to market and sell to, but that comes with a lot of risk because we ramp up the content engine, we over deliver for all of these segments, and so do all of our competitors. And so I actually thought about this a few months ago, and I said, when I was in corporate marketing roles, I would have anywhere from 3 to 4 segments. Each segment has an ICP, maybe a buying group, and we would create content for each of those segments. We would distribute that content across social, syndication, email, outbound, et cetera, right? And I started thinking, how many pieces of content are we creating on a quarterly basis? It easily becomes 50, 60, 70 pieces of content. Then you think about your market and you say, okay, well, I have 9 to 10 direct competitors. They're all creating the same amount of content. And we have one buyer who's now seeing, do the math, 700, 800 pieces of content a quarter. And that's just insane. Of course, they're going to tune us out.
Yeah.
They're getting beaten over the head with it. And it's just too much.
Yeah. And I think about like the AI prompts we're putting in to develop that messaging. And, for all smart marketers, we're probably putting in the same prompts
Mm,
to develop the same content. So not only is it just incredible, the sheer quantity of content that's out there, it all sounds the same, which
mhm,
just confuses our buyer. One of the points you had brought up, Steve, when we were kind of preparing for today's discussion that I really found it stood out to me was just kind of how we're doing all of this to win the new customer, but then what's
mhm.
happening to our existing customers? And I,
Yeah, and I've got a thought there too. Yeah, I think when you step back and look at the go to market and you think about the CEOs of these companies, right? And they're saying we need more efficiency from the go to market. That's
yeah,
that's purely on an economic basis, looking at revenue. And so I think the teams that are underprepared, they think, oh, let's just go market to our customers. So they take all of those same crappy tactics and apply them to customers, which
yeah,
is a terrible, terrible idea. One, you really don't want to irritate your prospects, but now you're talking about irritating customers.
yeah,
You're going to exacerbate churn. You'll create retention risk. And so I think expansion can absolutely be an opportunity, and you can bring the go to market around that idea. But it's all in how you do it, right? It's not just a revenue at all costs type of activity
yeah,
that you want to do.
totally.
Totally. And this like acquisition desperation, we could call it, it's leading to not even targeting the right prospects, which is, even if they do become clients, is going to also exacerbate churn, right?
Mhm,
Totally.
mhm. And you might bring them in on short-term goals, right? I think that's the risk there, where marketing used to have this altruistic mission of we're going to understand who our customer is, what makes them tick, and then we're going to align our value
Right.
to their needs, right?
Yeah.
And that's how you build a long-term relationship. But when you start competing off of features and specs and quick wins, you're going to have high churn.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great point. So I guess maybe, Kristen, what do you think? What can sales and marketing teams do to cut through all of that noise and get attention, get people to
Yeah.
care?
Yeah. I mean, I'll hit on some points that we covered in the first couple webinars for, those who weren't able to hear that message. But, really with the work we're doing with the priority sale, we're really focusing on solving this problem. We know that, buyers are so, like I said before, frustrated and confused, and they don't want to talk to salespeople because all we're doing is creating noise for them. So, they're doing a lot of times 83% of the research on their own before they even have a conversation with a salesperson. At that point, because of all this messaging that we're firing at them that all sounds the same, they've gotten to a point where they see our solution the same as all of our competitors, the other solutions they're comparing us against. And in their brain, they think we look the same. So to Steve's point, it's going to be a race to the bottom. It's going to be who can do it the fastest or the cheapest. And, the buyer feels like they're in control of that process with the seller, and they can drive the outcomes they want. And so therefore our margins are just fully eroding. In that first moment of truth, which we call the procurement sale as described, sellers really have a challenge to figure out how to sound different, how to show their unique value and position their solution to the buyer in a way that it sort of separates them from the rest of the pack so that they can really command their price, their margin, and really do that through the lens of the value that they provide. But first and foremost, the priority sale, which is the second moment of truth, is where sellers can engage higher level prospects inside of companies that they are targeting and ultimately influence the sales process through a different type of messaging that really helps a prospect before they're even shopping, before they've decided they need to pursue a solution to resolve whatever pain they have. And the way we do that is by showing them the threat that looms if they do nothing. And one of my favorite quotes from Brian Gray is that human beings do not change until the risk of their status quo is greater than the discomfort of change. Change is hard, especially if you're in a large organization. So your buyers really need to believe in this threat and therefore make solving this problem a priority. And how we do that as sellers, we do that by reaching our buyer through trusted communities. One of the best ways to do it is in that thought leadership pillar. It's how do we get on stage in front of our buyers at an event or through a group that they trust, their peer groups, whatever it is. How do we get in front of them and share this messaging? How do we reach them through their trusted communities? That could be through like an introduction or a referral through a mutual contact. It could be through joining those community groups, associations. So, it's really important that sellers go after that higher level prospect because that higher level prospect is often who's going to feel the threat the greatest. They need to have the right messaging to connect their solution to that threat and position their solution as unique and different and more valuable than their competitors. So yeah, it's the way to go.
I think we're seeing a trend with the companies that are doing that are thriving in this environment are going back to really authentic storytelling and content. Like, right, Steve? Like we were just talking
Yeah.
about this the other day. Um, and it's this desire to connect at a very human level and develop trusted relationships, right?
Hmm. Yeah, and it's a bit refreshing, right? I think there's two trains of thought here, which around this discussion is, one is yes, it's getting much harder to sell. It's getting much harder to actually get responses from that volume of messages we're sending. But I think that's only if you play that game. And so, like the smart companies are going to play a different game, and a lot of them are going back to basics, right? Because when you do focus on personalization and you do think about the threats and the experiences that our buyers have in their day-to-day jobs, and then you speak to that and tell stories to that, that's going to break through way more than all of this AI generated stuff that we're all receiving, right? And I think that's what's going to stick out. And that'll be sort of like, as we come around the bend in 2025, hopefully seeing more of that. And you see folks going back to thinking about their value propositioning, their narrative, their positioning, and then doing that at, some of these levels of segmentation, and thinking about your unique ICP and how can you deliver that message in a more customized way.
Totally. So, as we're talking about the volume of messaging and all this inside data that everybody has access to, this array of tools that are available, is so extensive. The access to this data is like unprecedented. What do you see as some of the pitfalls of all of this data-driven targeting?
Yeah, there's a couple of things here, and I'll start with a quote that I used to say very often, probably too often, to my teams was, "If there isn't a problem before technology, there will absolutely be a problem after technology."
Yep.
And it's just this adage, right? That technology doesn't really just solve problems. You have to find the problem first and then match the technology to it. And I think the same thing with data, right? You have tools like Clay, you have vast amounts of intent data available today, and we all have access to it. And so we can target based on hiring trends, funding trends, geo expansion. I mean, you can even customize through APIs and bring in your own data sources. And that's all great, but I think it comes with a lot of responsibility. And for me, what it's really about is, where can you find the intersection of data signals that align precisely to, like, your buyer, what you offer, and then like the concentric circle, right? Of like right in the middle, which is the sweet spot. And if you can find data that allows you to message against that, that's fantastic. But that's not going to come out of the box. There's no tool or service that offers that today. That's some work that has to be done internally. So I think it's really about, evaluating and auditing what kind of tools, what kind of data, what kind of automation, what kind of systems do we need to get our engine working. But you have to figure out what that engine is, right? And that's the stuff we're talking about, which is like a good, strong value prop, getting in front of your customers, understanding, their triggers and pain points, right? And then try to accelerate that with technology.
Totally. And I believe there's absolutely consequences for competing for these audiences if you don't take all of those steps, right?
Totally.
We're going to see decreased engagement, decreased conversions.
Mhm.
I think Brian said in a, previous webinar that, we are very soon here, we're going to all, the access to data will be free. It will be accessible to everyone. And it is almost accessible to everyone now. It's just not free yet, but we're eclipsing this era where, and especially when we think about the skills that we've developed as sales and marketers and what AI will be able to come in and do and replace. And, we are going to need to evolve and develop different skills. To Steve's point, without a doubt, a big role for marketing and even sales in the future is going to be on the operational side and making sure this technology is working, that it is sourcing accurate data, that it is, deploying the right messaging to our segmented audiences and all those things. But as we really build out this very automated flow of marketing, it's scary because, where do the humans add value to this outside of
Mhm.
just managing the tech? And I think definitively, as we said before, on the sales side, the ability to develop, nurture, and have these human relationships that are highly influential, like this is kind of like old school selling, and we sort of, I think the modern salesperson, especially like in the SDR world or inside sales, has gotten so accustomed to, building out their sales rep sequences and, waiting for, insights to show that a buyer's in a buying window. And, it's all these things, but again, everyone very soon will have access to all of these things. So it's only going to continue to amplify this scale and the volume at which we're just throwing out messaging and hitting all the same buyers. And so, it's going to be an interesting shift for human sellers to really um, get back into understanding at its core how to build relationships, how to establish trust, and how to be influential. And it's going to be interesting to see, how we make that leap, but it's necessary. It's like I said before, buyers are so fed up with what we're doing right now, and they just want authenticity. They want real human conversation, and they want to feel safe. So,
That is such a great point. As far as like actioning that though, like we know how important trust is and social proof in B2B marketing sales, but how do we do that? How do we establish that trust and build that relational equity?
Yeah, I would love to jump in. I think there's two ideas here that I think are starting to play out. One's not a new idea, which is actually just owning the audience yourself, right? I think as things have become more and more transactional, it's so easy to advertise. It's so easy to outbound, right? You go to Apollo, you go to Zoom Info and Clay, and you can just have access to millions and millions of people, and you can run these transactional messages. But what if you actually owned that audience yourself, right? What if you delivered value months and months ago that in exchange for that value, they gave you their information and you now put them into an intelligent nurture flow with good content and thought leadership and things that will educate them and bring value to their day, right? We're not selling. I think that becomes an opportunity. You're no longer relying on renting your audience, basically. And I remember about 10 years ago when content marketing was kind of all the rage, and it was all, it was either SEO driven content or it was thought leadership. And a lot of the ideas floating around then were, what if we could displace the publishers? What if we didn't need publishers? What if we didn't need external audiences, right? What if we own those audiences? So I think that's a powerful idea that folks can take advantage of. And then the next idea is really kind of like descaling what we're doing and running more micro targeted marketing campaigns and sales plays. And I think that kind of brings some of this stuff together where, we aren't going to just purely go back to just like human to human, like no technology, no data, no signals. Like we should use that stuff, but we should use it in an intelligent way. And I think one of the ways to do that is to have these small scale activities that allow you to hyper focus on a certain group or a segment, and then you can test and iterate and you can really find what's working before you go and distribute, massive amounts of bland content out to everybody.
totally. I mean, we're definitely seeing that resurgence in account-based marketing and that hyper focus. And since we're here talking about margins, I mean, it's a healthy shift, because if we can really narrow our audience down to the best matching criteria that we have for the type of buyer that would
Mhm.
feel that threat looming that we solve for, we're just so much more successful when that messaging really aligns with who we are trying to help. And I also think, with ABM, there's something to be said, like I was sharing before, about these shared communities. As you're developing those target lists, what is your gateway or your connection to these buyers? Do you have some shared contacts that could provide, a trusted introduction, a genuine referral? Do you attend the same events? Do you, follow the same podcasts or the same thought leaders on LinkedIn? Like, where is that connectivity, right? It's not just, okay, we're going to do ABM, we're going to throw hundreds of companies on a spreadsheet that we don't really know, but they have some general demographical information that seems to line up with who our buyers are, right? But it's nah,
Mhm.
that's not ABM, right? So it is like, how do we get that highly curated list of companies ideally where we're going to have influence to get in the door, deliver our message, and it's a buyer that really is going to identify with the threat that our solution resolves.
Mm-hmm.
So I couldn't agree with you more. And that sort of more focused approach, both for sales and marketing.
Focused, yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of I was just talking with someone around focus, and the other half of focus is determining what not to do, right? And so
Yeah.
there's so much we could be doing, but often you have to step back and say, okay, here's what we're not going to do, and
Yeah,
that's going to allow you to focus.
totally.
Well, we're running at time here, so I'd like to share a few concluding thoughts. And we do have a couple questions I want to make sure we leave a couple minutes to get to. But first off, I wanted to thank Kristen and Steve for sharing your expertise today. We've explored a lot of really thought-provoking, topical subjects today that are really challenges facing sales and marketing teams. So, how oversaturated channels and data-driven targeting are intensifying competition and commoditizing our prospects, how we need to be differentiating in a sea of similar or exactly the same messaging by leveraging that trust and relational equity to get earlier engagement from the right prospects, and how reframing your value from features to problem solving is essential to break through the prospect apathy to get people to care, right? So the takeaway I think that I see is that success lies in standing out, not through louder outreach, but through more strategic human approaches that build that trust and truly resonate with your audience. Just a couple more thoughts I want to share as a reminder from our last session, if you were able to make it. We are still accepting submissions for our priority pitch challenge. So we have a question that we'd encourage you to bring to your team individually. And the idea is to compare their responses. And that question is, if you only had 40 seconds with a prospect, what would you say? The goal is to find out if you have a consistent message that will create demand from your prospect and demonstrate that unique value that we've been talking about today. So see how aligned and consistent your team's messaging is, and submit your pitches to marketing@therevcollective.com by December 17th. Everyone who participates will receive a copy of the priority sale co-authored by Brian Gray. And now we will open up the floor to a couple of questions. If you haven't submitted it yet, please do so right now. Although we have one in here already. Um, okay, when targeting prospects who seem indifferent, what are some practical ways to quickly establish credibility and stand out without overloading them?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think, to the first kind of point we talked about, um, I really do think it has to do with understanding how humans think and make decisions. And, I was recently at an event where there were several financial services companies that had their pop-up banners kind of standing next to each other. And every single one of them said things like, great customer service, careful with your money. I mean, all these things that were so generic. And ironically, literally all like three of these direct competitors had the exact same value proposition on their banners. And so, the biggest thing that I would say is learn how to define your unique value. There's a framework we use to really help sellers and marketers really establish a different messaging to communicate with their buyers. And it is this framework that asks, so if you're like, okay, we're great at customer service, so what? So what? So that. So it's like, why does customer service matter? Okay, then dig a little bit deeper, and you can keep probing and keep peeling back the onion until you really get at the core of what is that true need that your client, that your prospect has. And like I said before, it is really about eliminating that threat. But when you're talking about your unique value, getting to that core, because all of your competitors are going to stay surface level. They're not going to really be able to understand what's at the bottom for your prospect. But if you can go through that exercise and learn that and learn to talk about your solution in that way, it makes all the difference in the world. Steve, I don't
I
know what you
love
think.
that,
Yeah.
Kristen. Yeah, and I think one way to I think get really good at that is testing, right? And I think that your product marketing team, your messaging, your content teams can partner up around the go to market and have a testing strategy. And like how the goal shifts from we need to send this one email to then get a meeting to like, hey, we're using email, we're using ads, we're using content as a way to test our message and make that repeatable, right? And that could be every Monday you come up with a new test and a new function, you test it for a week. The following Monday you see what worked, what didn't. You come up with 3 more tests, and then you try to beat the test over and over again until you have fully maximized the results, and then you move on to another area of testing. And I think that it'll improve, but also brings a little bit of like fun back into the process, right? Like this whole transactional go to market, at least from my experience, hasn't been very fun the last few years.
Yeah.
So we can bring a little bit more agility into it.
Yeah.
Totally. And that testing is so important too, to challenge our own assumptions about what our prospects' priorities and threats are, right?
Hmm.
And really put that into action and discover what those truly are. Unfortunately, we're out of time to answer any remaining questions, but we will reach out to you individually, or if you'd like to schedule time with Kristen or anyone on the call, we will make sure you have our meeting links to do so. As we wrap up, I just want to remind you about our next session. We'll be skipping next week for the holiday, but December 4th, Wednesday, December 4th at 11 a.m., we'll be hosting another session. It's about where is there room for human sellers and marketers in the era of AI. So it'll be very, very driven on where we fit in this AI era. So thank you all again for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you hopefully at our next session.
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks. Goodbye.
Stephen.